Hello, everybody. Thanks. We're just about to get underway with Ricky Spencer from the University of Western Sydney, and he's going to talk to us about the 1 Million Turtle Project. This is a video. Ricky is actually online and will be available to answer questions, so we should be able to. He should be able to hear it through the speaker. So yeah. Anyway, I'll play the video and then we'll have an opportunity to ask questions.
Thanks for coming to see and watching my presentation. My name's Ricky Spencer. I'm from Western Sydney University. I'm going to talk to you about our 1 Million Turtles project, where we're reconceptualising or rethinking turtle conservation to essentially engage and have community-led conservation outcomes. But it needs to be science-led, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the science behind it and explore some cool solutions that we're trying to implement throughout Australia. Okay, so over the last couple of years, there's been some, pretty important publications come out about the global declines of turtles. We're seeing major declines of very common turtles, things like invasive pests, road mortality, disease, and habitat destruction are all having impacts, and I'll show you how. So I'm not going to concentrate today particularly on the disease aspect of it. We've seen a spectacular event that occurred in 2015 with the Bellinger River turtle. I'm going to concentrate on these three major impacts. Firstly, habitat destruction, also road mortality, and then finally look at the impact of foxes, which is a pest animal in Australia, and how we're going to solve it through community-led conservation. Okay, so first thing I'm going to concentrate is habitat destruction and urbanisation. So my team has produced a publication that's now in preprint, but what we actually did was quantify habitat loss or wetland loss throughout Australia's biggest city in terms of which is Sydney, and how it's spread throughout Western Sydney and how the landscape's completely changed. So you can see in the middle here, which essentially we've now broken up into what we call local government authorities or councils, shires, that kind of thing. The hotspots where we're seeing upwards of 25% loss of wetlands in some of these local government authorities. And the way you can see in the bottom photo, what we've done is through satellite photos quantified surface area loss and number of wetlands. You can see things like old farm dams, which are well established, been there for 100, 120 years, plus natural wetlands, have essentially been filled in and houses have been put over the top. We're now looking at the modelling maps on the right-hand side. You can actually see that between 2000 and 2007, the distribution essentially has now become, compared to 2010 to 2017, you can see the distribution has now become of eastern longneck turtles, which is the most common species in Australia, has become quite fragmented. You can see now that significant gaps associated with this wetland loss. We estimated that between 40,000 and 100,000 turtles were actually displaced over that 7 to 8 year period. Also now I want to focus on road mortality, and I'll briefly go into its impacts. We've now published this data is based on data that's been collected through Citizen Science, TurtleSat, which is our citizen science project. This shows road mortality of eastern longnecks in particular throughout southeastern Australia, and particularly in the Murray River, which is our largest river catchment. But the extent and the numbers of turtles that we found dead, were recorded dead, was quite surprising in terms of the extent of that mortality. The biggest threat to freshwater turtles in Australia is pest animals, particularly foxes. have foxes throughout Australia. They were introduced about 120 to 130 years ago. They destroy between 95 and 100% of nests. So very little recruitment is actually occurring in freshwater turtle populations. And as you'd expect in terms of management, let's go in and kill foxes. This figure here actually shows nest predation rate, so turtle nest predation rate, and mean presence of foxes per day. So essentially an index of abundance. What you can actually see is that, yep, high nest predation rate when you have high numbers of foxes, or right up on the right-hand side. But it isn't until, if you head towards the y-axis here, it isn't actually until you completely eliminate foxes, or almost completely eliminate foxes, where you see a drop in nest predation rate. This makes management of foxes almost impossible. Fox management is largely done by poison baiting and shooting, which has obviously animal welfare impacts, and the scale that's needed to actually create a vacuum of no foxes within an area is largely prohibitive in terms of cost. So we need to look for solutions, but we actually now need to see what impacts that's actually having. So we've done modelling, and you can see with the top graph here, I'm going to concentrate on the top graph and the bottom one here. With the top graph here, you can actually see, look at the top line. This is population size on the right-hand side. This is year. We're doing demographic modelling here. You can have high nest predation rates in these populations. So this is based on, if you look at the top line, it's 75% plus or minus 25%. So in some years, you're getting 100% nest predation in this population, but they're fine. The longevity gets them through it. So as long as you've got some relief and you've got some recruitment happening, they can bounce along and do fine. You implement the levels that we're seeing in terms of nest predation with foxes, and this is kind of now 90 plus or minus 10%. So it's essentially 80 to 100% each year. You start seeing declines in the population, but still not declines towards totally towards extinction within 200 years. You throw in a little bit, now I'm looking at the bottom line here of this top graph, you throw in a little bit of adult mortality combined with high nest predation rates with no recruitment, bang, you're on your way to extinct populations. Now I'm going to jump to the bottom graph here. So you can see this now is published data where we've actually quantified, well, we've actually gone out and surveyed 50 odd populations in our Murray River catchment that I talked about. In areas where we, our collaborators found turtles in high abundance down in South Australia. So in this case, we're looking at catch per unit effort and essentially going, if you follow the x-axis from the river mouth all the way to the headwaters, you see the populations in South Australia, particularly down near the bottom of the river, are almost extinct. What this study does confirm is a study that came out in 2011 by Bruce Chessman that showed his populations, several populations that he was studying over the last 40 years, several species that declined by 90%. So at current levels of recruitment and mortality, these levels are not sustainable. We need to actually do something about it. And essentially what we need to do is get lots and lots and lots of hatchlings back into the river. So if the solution is releasing lots of turtles, how do we do it in the best way? Longevity, eggs, they're the major life history advantages of turtles, but the communities love them, and that's something that we can take advantage of and actually implement community-based strategies that release lots and lots of turtles. And the best way to do it, and this is what we published a few years ago, is take advantage of the longevity and the number of eggs that turtles produce. So if you look at the top right-hand corner, where you've got the circles of blue and red, the red represents a harvest population. So essentially, if we take eggs from this population every year, we can release them throughout this many populations, and this is to scale, to restore turtle populations to their pre-European or pre-Fox levels. You can see now, you see the map of Australia in these at a regional level. The red populations represent harvest populations. The blue represents the size and density of a number of populations that these harvest populations can actually service throughout a region. So we can actually use this now to create meta-population network solutions. But how do we do it? And that's the real question that we're trying to address with the 1 Million Turtles project. So what we're trying to do is actually look at solutions that communities can implement. We implemented last year a turtle island, and we actually got turtles nesting in it. The community built this. This is the Blue Mountains, just on the edge of Sydney. This is the mayor. If you look over here, this is the mayor cutting the ribbon to float the island. And these are the eggs. This is the proof of concept that we actually got turtles nesting on there. The community led it, local land care groups, and actually built it. But we can now, what we're looking now is to build them to scale and quite large sizes. Other solutions that we're looking at is designer nesting beaches. So in this area here, we actually just created a beacon on the landscape. We actually put drift fences around, something you can do in the nesting season. We're also working with golf courses because they're nesting in bunkers. Other solutions we're looking at are things like Turtles in School program. Actually looking, potentially for, commercial type, well, not commercial, but large quantities of turtles. And these things here of what we've designed, essentially shipping containers, what we've called turtle pods that schools can now use and utilise. This is right at the beginning stage of this, but these are the ways that we're engaging communities. The facilities at Winton are going to be a really important regional hub for this. So you can go to our website, 1millionturtles.com, to actually look at the framework. TurtleSat is certainly a very important part of our citizen science program. It's been around for quite a while now and it has had tremendous impact. You can see if you don't know what it is, it's turtle survey analysis tools, and we've revamped the app. It's available on Android, but as well as the App Store. And it's a point where people can actually record where they see turtles. This is actually a major point where they actually see turtles are on the roads, as you can see in the middle here, and it's had tremendous impact. And communities actually have been able to drive community conservation themselves by petitioning councils, road transport, those kind of things, to put up signs. It has also been vital for us to record where turtles are nesting. Where turtles nest, they usually will come back, or at least be nesting year after year in the same spot, or the population will be. So for every dead turtle nest that has been recorded into TurtleSat, potentially is 100 odd saved nests each and every year through things like nest protection, because we can then start targeting the hotspots for nesting. We are also establishing a citizen science training hub through the Australian Reptile Park, but we're looking to do it regionally as well, where areas where people can actually interact with turtles. One other thing that we're actually be launching over the next month or so is what we call the National Nest Predation Survey. And we're really looking for communities and conservation agencies to actually get involved. It's a great way to measure the impact of foxes. So what we're actually getting communities to do is actually to go out there, create fake turtle nests with chicken eggs in a controlled experimental way, and record the nest predation rates as well as the number of foxes that they see on camera. But as I said, the most simplest and profound actions are picking up turtles off the roads, protecting their nests, and we're creating ways to actually do this in a controlled way, but also the best way possible. But it's very, very simple for people to actually protect nests, and we're going to train them, and through the 1 Million Turtles program. And we need people to get involved. We need, communities, but also conservation agencies to get involved and start protecting turtles and their nests.
Hi, Ricky. Can you hear us?
I can hear you now.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, that's because we've got it routed through here.
Right.
Okay. Now, the interesting thing is we'll have to get the other mics on. Oh, did I? Ah. Can you do that for me? Thank you. So our other microphone. So we've got some questions. Ricky's here. He can answer questions, and he'll be back for the Q&A session too. So any questions for Ricky? Suzette, here you go.
Hi, Ricky. I might have missed some of your presentation because I was desperately trying to write notes, but you mentioned that you're from UWS, but this National Nest Predation Survey, can we also participate in that in Victorian communities?
Yep. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Yes.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. This is for everybody to do it. We're still going through a few of the very minor approval processes at the moment. So, but once we get through that, it'll be a national launch for anybody with a property or any management agency that wants to be involved or get communities involved to actually do it. So what we really want to do is actually create a live tally that creates almost like like the hotspot mapping that people can watch and see how that's updated pretty much every day. This will be ongoing to actually look where, not so much where we will see high nest predation, because we expect it pretty much everywhere in southern Australia. It's going to be the pockets where we start seeing lower nest predation rates, which will be really, really important for management and going forward. That those areas will be critical. Okay, thanks, Ricky. Everyone heard that. So, any other questions for Ricky? No, I think we're good. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Ricky. You'll probably hear the thunderous clapping now. Okay, so now we'll have Lisa Farnsworth from Winton Wetlands to talk about the projects that are happening here around rewilding, in particular growling grass frog. Sorry, we just need to...
Oh, yep. Yep.
Okay, Ricky, I'm putting you in the I'll leave you to work that bit out.
Yep. Okay. Excellent to see you all here finally. It's been, 18 months, 2 years in the making, so it's fantastic to be in the one place at the one time with everybody physically here. Been a great lead-in of speakers this morning, flagging some of the logistical and other issues around the process of sort of reintroductions and rewilding projects. And I'm going to tell you a bit today about how we're working towards reintroducing growling grass frogs back to Winton Wetlands. Lots of other contributors to this work, not just myself. Obviously Lance, a colleague, and a couple of scientists, Dr. Jeff Hurd and Matt West, and some pretty important participation from a local ex-local community member, who I'll expand on a little bit into the presentation. So if you don't know where you are, hopefully you do, but you're in Victoria. So this is yeah, that's it. Just out of interest, this is Winton Wetlands. So it's a naturally low-lying ephemeral swampland. You're between Benalla and Glenrowan, roughly, in northeastern Victoria. A bit of brief historical context. I'm not going to go into massive detail. It's a really interesting site. It's had a really rich and diverse history of land use, a really important meeting place, and an area that's seasonally rich in food and other resources for Indigenous peoples, the Yorta Yorta. Significant agricultural use throughout, post 1869 for grazing and cropping, and of course between 1967 and 2009 became the site of Lake McCowan, so an irrigation storage area. Unfortunately, it didn't perform very well as an irrigation storage. That's a long story, but I won't go into that. You can find out more about that down the track. But briefly from 2009 onwards, the dam was, Lake McCowan was decommissioned, and Winton Wetlands took over the management and restoration of the site. So we've been going for more than 10 years now with the restoration side of things. Again, just a brief aerial map here. It's 8,750 hectares, so a large restoration site made up of, I think it's 33, is that right? 33 individual ephemeral wetlands that make up about 3,800 hectares, and the rest is primarily grassy woodland, plains grassy woodland habitat, hence the importance of talking about grassland management tomorrow also. So yeah, that will be a great session too. Just a couple of photos there for you, but you can feel free to go out and explore yourself. Briefly, the aims of our ecological renewal program out here are to improve the biodiversity and resilience of the system. And you can see here through various means, but cannot be achieved without really significant partnerships with researchers, other land managers and community. And one way we're aiming to, I guess, improve the resilience of the system is potentially through reintroducing or rewilding species back to the reserve. And one of those candidate species is the growling grass frog, Latoria reniformis. Now, why are we potentially looking at growling grass frogs? Well, they were formerly present on site. The last record on the Biodiversity Atlas was 1970, so prior to Lake McCowan days, but they're now no longer present locally or in the immediate surrounds from what we can gather. They don't have a natural ability to recolonise this space. The closest known source population is, in fact, Bendigo Water Treatment Plant, so about 200 kilometres away. It's a long way to hop, so they can't really get down here themselves, unless they hitch a lift, which some frogs allegedly do. Thankfully for us, they're large charismatic species, which is good. They're a bit of an easier sell to the general public too. But importantly, they're functionally different to the other 6 to 8 frog species that we have on site. They predate on other frogs, which is actually adds another layer of complication to breeding them too. But they're also a key prey item for, particularly for other threatened species, including wetland birds such as Australasian bitterns. Which have we had a record out here? We're aiming at having records out here. Certainly hoping that re-establishing growlers will actually attract populations of bitterns to the area too. So. Their presence back in the system, well, we hope will further stabilise the food web out here, because they provide a really important link between the aquatic and terrestrial environments on site. And it was, highlighted back in 2016 by Dr. Jeff Hurd that the wetlands could potentially provide some suitable habitat for restoring the species at this site and indeed become a source population for the northern Victorian region. So just today, I'm just sort of talking about these stages of the project. There's obviously future stages, stage 2B, 3, 4, but it's been quite a process to get to the point where we're close to moving frogs here. And so the project concept was discussed at the 2016 Science Forum in a workshop from what I can remember. And yeah, a few years later, we got some funding to look at the feasibility of reintroducing the species on the site. So I'll take you through that stage and also where we're at currently in terms of the translocation preparation and captive breeding facility construction, those types of things. So importantly, once we'd sort of flagged that growlers were a potentially good candidate species for reintroduction, we were looking at getting some funding support to carry out a feasibility study. Thankfully, Wet'nall Environment Trust came on board and assisted us with funding for that. We wanted to see whether or not it was actually really even a feasible idea to be getting growlers back on the reserve. And to do this, we looked at some of the habitat, looked at the suitability of the habitat that we have on offer out here. We looked at what we could do to enhance what we do have for the species. We wanted to confirm that they were actually absent, so we needed to try a bit harder to find them. And we also wanted to understand whether or not we had chytrid fungus present on site, and if we did, where, how prevalent, what sort of loads of fungus there was on the local frogs at Winton Wetlands, because that is indeed a key threat to growling grass frog persistence. So in terms of the results from that feasibility study, we first undertook a habitat suitability assessment at a chain of ponds along the old Lake McCowan dam wall. So we're calling them the McCowan Ponds now. And these are amongst, well, apart from the duck pond in the other corner of the reserve, it's an area where we've got some permanent water and particularly reasonably suitable habitat there. So we were looking at aspects of the habitat such as water depth and temperature and salinity. This is one of our keen volunteers, Rod Sherlock, setting up water temperature monitoring devices within some of these ponds. Very basic little eye button devices put out for, I think it was about 3 or 4 months to track the variation in water temperature regime within some of these permanent ponds. Again, just a bit of an idea, yeah, kind of made it up as we went along almost, but it turned out to be quite effective method for measuring temperature. We also, amongst the water quality variables that we collected, we also collected some cover abundance of submerged, floating and emergent vegetation around within each of the ponds, and also looked at some of the cover of grasses and other species around the edges of these ponds as well. Incidentally, there's actually some particularly good-looking habitat right at the base of our old dam wall, which is, that's just a little image of that there too. We also looked closely at these ponds in terms of what we might be able to do practically on the ground to enhance the habitat for the growlers. And one thing we could do, and one thing we have lots of, is rocks. Now, you can see the dam wall adjacent to the pond there. It was simply a case of shifting rocks and making these extra rocky spits into some of these ponds. The idea being to create not only sort of shelter habitat, but also basking habitat for the frogs. So we know, again, that chytrid fungus is a big issue with population persistence of growlers, and if you can provide them with some decent basking habitat, they tend to cope better and can potentially reduce their load by basking in the sunshine. So yeah, did a little bit of that. Significant participation from the Friends of Winton Wetlands, doing some semi-aquatic and aquatic revegetation around the perimeter of some of these ponds as well, this is also really, really important. And yeah, some erosion, pretty fundamental, but basic erosion control measures. So some of the embankments there needed some stabilising. We've used a bit of, the good old jute mesh, but also used some of what was already lying around, some logs for barriers and just some natural veg that was there too, just to slow the flow of some of the water into those ponds and hopefully just improve the quality of water a little bit further. Now, this is how we confirmed the absence of the species, I suppose. Quite a process involved. This involved 4 years of frog call recordings between July and November at 12 sites across the reserve. It represented about 3,000 hours of recordings. More recently, we had a University of Melbourne intern come and assist us with 2 weeks of audio moth recordings in the Warby Ovens National Park and Mount Meg Nature Reserve, which is just adjacent to the reserve, just to cover off on some areas adjacent. Importantly, the 3,000 hours of calls I've mentioned were recorded on pretty basic devices, but these were purchased through community grants via the Friends of Winton Wetlands grant funding. So fundamentally vital bits of equipment to these recordings. That was just a map here of some of the sites in the Warby Ranges that were sampled. With those thousands of hours of recordings, there was no way any of us were going to have time to scroll through all of them of our own accord. So we got the help of Dr. Karen Rowe from Museums Victoria and a program called Kaleidoscope, which is built by Wildlife Acoustics. She assisted us to create what is known as a recogniser. So you tell the program, this is a growler call, and play your 3,000 hours through. And if you've trained it well, it should be able to pull out growler calls in amongst a cacophony of other frog calls and birds and things. I find it fascinating because it gives you an actual image of what you're seeing, which is really cool. And we're looking actually to work with Karen and Museums Vic once we do get frogs on site to look at how the population disperses. So we'll be setting up more of these audio moth recording devices and actually remotely surveying for them as well as physically surveying for them. Oh, there you go. So what you're hearing there is what you're seeing there. Very distinct call. Obviously lacking from the landscape, but it'd be bloody excellent to hear them out here again. So also some of the results of our initial sort of chytrid swabbing. So we've been catching frogs and reptiles as part of our general survey work and have swabbed 150 individuals from 6 different frog species, and those little swabs get sent to a lab down in Melbourne to analyse for the presence of and load of chytrid fungus. And we do know that we have chytrid on site, and it is across the site proper, so from north to south, east to west. But we're, at least from the samples that we've got so far, we're looking at much lower zoospore loads, and much lower fungus loads on these samples that relative to in areas where growlers are happily persisting. So that's encouraging. And we're seeing, again, I'm not sure if it's a sampling artefact yet, but we're seeing that there's species that are more likely to be carrying larger loads of this. So the two froglet species we have out here, and the marsh frogs, but the burrowing species, not so much. Again, not statistically significant, but it's absolutely vital background information to have before we're moving these frogs back on site. So we gathered all of that information together, and thankfully in the reporting we put to Wet and All, and to Wet and All at the end of that stage 1, they were really interested in assisting us for further stages of the work, and the Ross Trust also came on board, and we thought it was worth, based on the information we collected to that point, worth pursuing the idea of translocating the species. So the funding for stage 2 is allowing us to prepare, we have prepared now a translocation proposal, which is an undertaking in itself, if everyone knows the procedures behind that side of things. It's allowed us to purchase and install a frog quarantine facility, so an indoor laboratory area, and also allowed us to purchase the outdoor breeding habitat infrastructure that we need to be quarantining and then breeding them on site for release into the broader landscape. We also, again, plan on down the track translocating the frogs, and in the process we're also preparing a research and monitoring plan, which is we're working closely with both Museums Victoria and the University of Melbourne on that to cover off on things like dispersal and population genetics aspects of the project. So for the translocation panel to be convinced that this is a decent idea, they need to be happy that we've got sufficient suitable habitat to support the species here. The information we collected about the vegetation, water temperature, depth, salinity, the vegetation structure was utilised by Jeff Hurd in some habitat suitability modelling, and his subsequent population viability analysis revealed that we've got a really high likelihood of population persistence after reintroduction at one pond, and even higher if we were to pick a couple of sites, and we've got a couple of other ideas in mind, including the duck pond that if you're interested in, we're going to have a look at tomorrow. So encouraging from the modelling perspective. This is based on real data collected on the ground at these sites. We also need to convince the panel that the habitat's not already occupied by the species, and if it's not, then why isn't it? So have the threats been removed, or do we understand them reasonably well? Well, the analysis that we've undertaken with the Kaleidoscope program has recorded no growler calls. We don't have any physical evidence that they're here through our own reptile and frog survey work over the past 2 or 3 years. We know that there's 6 to 8 other species present, but none actually really occupies the niche that growlers do. A key threat to the species is the destruction of habitat and poor water quality. We're obviously a restoration site. We're actively and passively restoring the place. So we believe that threat is removed or will remain that way. Whilst we acknowledge that chytrid is present on the reserve, we think that our habitat enhancements and other measures that we've got in place, including the fact that we're getting lower zoospore loads than other areas, means that this threat is sort of reduced. It's still there, but we're aware of it, but we're doing as much as we can to keep that as minimal as possible. And we know that growlers are also threatened by the presence of introduced fishes, particularly carp. So prior to any broader site releases, we'll be looking to fish down those particular release ponds for any of those pesky, well, usually rather large, but pesky little guys. And Lance will be part of that down the track. So threats haven't been entirely removed, but I think we're getting a better understanding as to what is here and what we can and can't do to reduce some of those things. In terms of the quarantine and captive breeding facility, we were really lucky enough eventually, this was COVID impacted as well, to get to the potential source population in Bendigo at Coliban Water earlier this year and collect some genetic material and some chytrid swabs from the growling grass frog population there. As you can see, Lance is pretty stoked by it's like another grandchild, I think. That was a fantastic night because I think we were very convinced that they've got a very healthy, large population of frogs. For me, it was the first time I'd actually got to handle one before, so it was pretty awesome. And yeah, we've gathered some of that initial genetic material so that we can actually look at some founder genetics as well down the track. In the process of this scientific procedures premises licensing, so it's a reasonably big undertaking in itself is to get it up to scratch, and animal ethics applications due at the end of the month. We've submitted the translocation proposal in late January. They've sat and looked at it. I'm still waiting to hear back, but hopefully there's some decent feedback from the panel. We're just about done with the sort of construction of the indoor lab. We're just getting really prettying it up now. We're waiting on some shelving to come in, actually, incidentally, but it's here, so we can start sort of prettying that up. The external habitat is nearly ready also, so I've never been more excited to see troughs in the ground than I did the other day. We'll have little fences around each of those. There'll be 6 separate little habitat pods. And when the frogs have been quarantined in the lab facility, they'll get moved into those external habitats for breeding purposes. We can use 1 or 2 of those specifically for tadpole rearing, that sort of thing, because we know that they eat each other, so it's probably going to be a bit of a process involved there too. But we're firming up research collaborations with the Uni of Melbourne and Museums Victoria, developing a research and monitoring plan We've got some audio moths coming finally from overseas. There was a microchip shortage due to COVID. They're coming. This is a massive element over the next 6 months to roll out a training program for volunteers to assist with the animal husbandry on site, but also get schools involved in our Grow Grub for Growlers initiative, which is basically getting the school groups to grow greens and also grow bins of cockroaches and crickets for feeding the captive population. So creating that community link. Sorry? Woodies, yes, woodies. Not cockroaches, that sounds bad. Woodies. And we've also applied recently for some federal funding under the name Task Force Growler, get on board, in partnership with Swamps, Rivers, Ranges and University of Melbourne that will hopefully increase the scale of the restoration of the species. So it's not Winton-centric, this has always been about a landscape scale restoration project for the species, and that's really exciting. Generally aiming for moving growlers here to the lab by spring this year and hopefully some releases subsequently. Very briefly, how did we get to here? Well, it started at a forum like this in 2016. That's really exciting. Really complex. Lots of inputs required from many aspects of the community. But grassroots community funding and participation was vital to gathering all that stage one information that fundamentally is going to help this actually happen. But what's really great, what gets me up in the morning, is that everyone's willing to get involved. Doesn't matter whether they're paid or not. There's just so much passion behind the restoration of the species, and you can't help but get on board. So, we're waiting with bated breath for that funding announcement. Hopefully, it comes soon. But in the meantime, this is pretty much Task Force Growler as it stands. I would like this to become such a big page that I can't fit everyone on there anymore. So, come at me with with your contact details, and we can expand on that. But otherwise, thanks for your time today, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks, Lisa. We've got time for a couple of questions, so if you've got a question, okay, down in the corner there. Oh, someone's coming to you with a mic. Yep, great.
G'day, my name's Mark. I'm wondering if you've got any examples of existing habitat that you think's pretty good, and will we be able to see it tomorrow?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, you can answer that if you like.
Yes, we will. We're going to walk to the around the duck pond, and we'll be able to show you some fantastic habitat there. And we've been doing some water management works to just push the system to be sort of semi-permanent at least, so that there will be a site potentially for growlers after the McCowan Ponds. But it's certainly one of the sites that we'll be releasing them at.
Sorry, Lisa. I used to live on Exchange Road, just over the other side of the Warbies, and I might make a suggestion that you get a monitoring pod over that side, because there's a couple of the creek beds, and in particular one private dam that I can almost be certain, because they were living in my veggie garden, eating all my grubs.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
That would be really exciting. That would be, well, I'll get back to you when we're done about that.
Okay, I think we had one other question. Suzette, yeah.
I'm going to have to increase the rates at my council because now I want to reintroduce the frogs and the fish and the mammals. But we actually did have growling grass frog in an ex-quarry, and we think it no longer exists, but we haven't done a lot of survey effort. Actually, that wasn't my question. My question is, with all those 3,000 hours that you were analysing, I know it wouldn't be easy, but can you also analyse it for other species? Because is it possible you'd find other species of rare or endangered frogs here or threatened frogs?
Yeah, so they've got the ability these days to build recognisers for many candidates. We were talking actually about the value of getting an Australasian bitten recogniser put together as well, because they're such cryptic animals. Yes, absolutely. So you could pretty much almost do a virtual frog survey using that information as well. And on that whole restoring growlers and fish and everything, the synergies between what Peter was talking about and Nick was talking about in terms of the habitat requirements of some of these freshwater fish and the growlers are just ridiculous. So I think we need to be working more so together on multiple species resto and how we can cover off on multiple, yeah.
Yep, agreed, Lisa. That's a good way to finish that.
Okay.
So we need to move on to our next speaker, which is Martin Potts. You've already seen this morning from Greening Australia. He's going to talk to us about the bell frogs in Gippsland and making room to move.
Thanks, Lance. We've had a great introduction to bell frogs then, so that saves people work. I appreciate. Up the top. Yep. Once again, thanks Lance for fitting me in when we saw the Winton was on. I emailed him very quickly and said, "Can you fit me in?" So he's fit me in. So I think I'm a bit of the comedy presentation before lunch. Room to move, heard it mentioned already this morning. It's a concept that came up over cups of coffee in a tea room with a CMA about how we often look at an area and conservation, but we're not taking into account the future scenarios. We're not allowing the species to move. We're often looking at boundaries. Our Ramsar boundary on the Gippsland Lakes is a classic example. It's very limited to where the project was. And for me, I work with vegetation and I look for icon species to measure the success of my revegetation works. And one of the limits of acceptable change in the Gippsland Lakes in the freshwater areas is our bell frogs. So I've been keeping my eye on those and learning from those the best places to work and learning from those what conditions they need to move. What a magnificent year it's been this year. We've had 4 or 5 years of drought. This year, everything's wet. What to explain and share a bit of my relationship to this work, it's very unscientific. I walk out into a place which I know, and I'm out there at night and I'm watching the space satellite go over, I'm watching the Geminoids meteorite shower, and I'm hearing the frogs calling, and I start asking them, "Hey, I want to see you, where are you?" And then, boom, there's that one. Oh, I'm like, "Oh, I love you guys. You're just there." So there's this, I have a connection with them that I love working with them. And people keep asking me to keep working on them. So I'm very fortunate that my work gets to revolve around frogs on one element, particularly when I work with plants. So a few years back, the Gippsland Lakes Ramsar plan was released, and it was quite a striking document for me, particularly around this map. If you look at the different colours, you'll see where that sort of lime green is the only recognised freshwater wetlands in the whole Gippsland Lakes. And to me, that was like, what? That's a massive transition from a system that was once predominantly fresh, and it's been alternate over the 10,000 years it's been around, but in the living memory of the elders we work with and the farmers, they have a memory of it fresh. So the landscape memory of the lakes is of a freshwater system. But the Paul Boone studies of coastal salt marsh shows that it's been transitioning over the thousands of years. But we work within a community that all say it should be fresh because they see what their grandfather saw and what they remember from that little while ago. So when I look at that, I also look at things and go, what can I do about that? So one thing that we started looking at was fringing wetlands. How can we make a difference to those? So there's, over the last 6 years, we've taken that area of the green and we've made that 3 times larger of freshwater availability around the Gippsland Lakes, mostly by plugging up drains of where 50 years ago it was the incentive to drain wetlands. We've just been plugging them back up. So as an example of that, you see one of these larger wetlands at the bottom of the Perry. We've had to rebuild a whole wall on the Avon River to allow that wetland to now operate as a wetland again and not just be open to the lake water. So the system of the estuary within the lakes is we're seeing upper on that far end of Lake Wellington, so the furthest point from the open entrance, we're seeing almost seawater levels of salt there. So that was moving into these wetlands, and in time of high winds could just pick up the water and they push into these wetlands, and the salt deposits there. The wetlands are doing their function as a kidney, but it's increasing salts very, very quickly, and we're seeing quite rapid vegetation changes. So we're getting in there and starting to change those. As an example, and I have this here because I learned this tool from here. Michelle, you presented on this 5 or 6 years ago, and it was an absolute treat for me to learn this system from this forum. The vegetation recovery support tool helps me to look at, when we are doing these changes, what species to look for, what is our intention when we do these hydrological changes, to what vegetation condition we'll see change, and then what species are we looking for starting to return, to see that the salt is moving out by that vegetation response. So that's the stuff. That's the dynamics for me, and taking these soil samples and germinating to see what might be in the soil, looking for the surrounding wetlands for the species we're after to see how they disperse. Kay Morris is working with us with grazing guidelines, and she's not far away to understand plant dynamics of how they move for me. So when we're putting instigating walls to stop salt incursion to allow fresh water to come up, we know what species we're looking for to return, thanks to this support tool. So while we're looking at these large systems and they're quite salt affected, and we're looking at increasing the fresh water, it was the frogs that started telling us the story about the importance of the refugia around those wetlands. So the further site where all the Melaleuca is at the back there was one of the first growler and golden sites that we found. We've got both species in that one waterhole, and we all got excited over that. The landowner was very excited over that. We all got involved. The wetland itself, they were in, but they basically contracted back to that spring. So as we were fencing that out and changing the hydrology, there was a spot here where the stock were just, you could see it was a bit wet. So we got in and dug a couple of holes going, let's make it bigger. That was about as much thought as we put into it. Fenced it out, got an excavator in, dug a couple of holes, and within a very short while, a couple of days after those holes were dug, we had a golden bell frog sitting in there that we were like, that's great. That year, Dr. Jeffrey Hurd that we mentioned before, that we had in the background with us, put in a master's student who went around looking for where the growlers are right through the district, and he took this photo of a little metamorph in that wetland. So we're all celebrating that. We've seen a breeding event within a little while of digging a hole. So this is great. But this is what I'm presenting on mostly today, is say 4 years on from there, it's absolutely not suitable for the frogs anymore. It's completely overgrown. We haven't seen any more in there. We have lots of other frogs, but as you can see, it's totally dominated by aquatic vegetation and riparian vegetation, and is no longer suitable at all. So we had them for a year, and that was it. Then they were gone. So we need to rethink what we're doing in that case. But at the time, we didn't know a lot better. All Jeff was saying is, they need to be deeper. And we're saying, yeah, they need to be deeper. So we dug them deeper. And the year after we dug that deeper, we also had the bushfires by then. At the end of the bushfires, Jeff was down with us and we were walking a site. And in that site, so hopefully that video will play. And I'm glad you can't hear it because we're both going, shit, shit. How many are there, Jeff? Shitloads. Yeah, it's fantastic. So we saw a whole lot of unidentified tadpoles, they're growlers and goldens. We weren't sure. Both were there, present on site, but well over 100 just sitting on the surface there at the time. Now, just put that into context. Where we are in the Gippsland Lakes, we've been surveying the whole Gippsland Lakes. There was a hotspot program initiated in the initial Love Our Lakes funding that looked for all the historic records of growlers and goldens as one of these limits of acceptable change species. We pulled that down just to a few areas, and the growlers we could only find in one area of the Gippsland Lakes, and they were estimated at the time about 40 to 60 of them. So next to none of them left anymore. In fact, they were about to move the whole distribution range back to Pakenham somewhere. So it was a significant find at the time. So to see a whole heap of frogs and see them breeding. For the golden bell frogs, there's a few more sites and they're more into the 300 to 600 range. So we're dealing with very limited numbers, so it's helping us really focus where our work needs to be. And I sat around the ponds for a fair while and watched them metamorph into the young and then watch them disperse. So we could say, yes, there was that successful breeding event on that site. There's two in that little photo, well camouflaged. There's one a bit bigger still with its tail. And so that was a wonderful time because, again, that refugia, Anna had been down doing her work with us. We were finding it hard to find sites. Everything was dry. It was extremely dry just when we hit those big bushfires. Where there were pockets of fresh water, it was a very significant little area. The fact that the rain came, put out those fires at the end, as we're standing on that site and seeing that that breeding event had occurred in this site during the end of that drought, we were extremely happy that had occurred. So there's one of the potential parents, just because they're beautiful looking. And another one, and in that site. And there's the wetland a few years on. So the good part about this site is we don't have that completely covered over now with aquatic vegetation. It's very deep. This year's very interesting. It's very cold. So the fringing vegetation's grown up, but the frogs have dispersed. The site's so large that they've all dispersed out and we're finding none in there and the water's quite cold. But it's quite a cold year and there's lots of available other spaces. So it's just one thing we need to watch on what's going on. So at the same time, of course we had Jeff out there and I'm in his ear, what do we do next? So we funded him to do one of his meta-population analysis. So I've heard that word a few times bring up today. I love hearing that word, thinking across a landscape. How can we look at the whole population dynamics of a species other than a particular site? So Jeff got involved more on ground and we started to think about this, or he started to think about this dynamics. So the actual wetland configuration of plants and the population dynamics across sites. I went and assessed 56 different wetlands within a particular region so that he could do his analysis. We worked on all those farms, incorporating the known sites where we were north of the Avon River and the large wetlands from there that we have already. So just to highlight that, these wetlands are now all functioning as wetlands again, other than part of the Perry. This wetland and this wetland and this wetland system are all now independent of the river, where before they were all just part of the river system. So now they're drying out. We're seeing the carp die out. We're seeing some of our indicator species returning. So Jeff's put this through his model and came up with a priority. Well, I wanted to know where to work on best. Where's the sites to move next? What's the next best site to help these frogs? So on this Perry, so we've got the Avon, one of the fastest flowing rivers fastest rising rivers in the southern hemisphere, and the Avon and the Perry system that comes through this chain of ponds. So we've got springs coming through these sands and this very fast flowing river that fills these up and then recedes again. And we've got the top three sites just on this one system here, all with the one landowner, thankfully, who's very keen on this work. So very limited funding, we got in with his excavator and started digging more holes. And much larger site this time than our smaller springs. So we've got springs nestled within a bend in a river primarily. A lot of the vegetation was there, we just took the stock off. And also translocated some species in there from the nearby wetlands just to hurry things along. And you can see the aerial footage of it here. So we've dug these bigger holes within, and that's the spring, the original spring. So that feeds into here and flows down into this system. So we've got a bigger area for the frogs. We had only recorded I think we had got picked up some growlers in there. It was nearly all Goldens. I was fortunate enough this year to get a contract with the CMA to do frog monitoring across the whole Gippsland Lake. So I've been out, we've undertaken 56 surveys in the last few months, looking for a breeding event. For the Gippsland Lakes need a breeding event within the Ramsay area. So a few of us have been out monitoring and all I've heard in here so far has been golden bell frogs. It's all we've heard, apart from one video footage that the landowner took around grand final days, so really early. He took this video, Mark, they're on. I went out, couldn't hear them. That was okay. We kept listening, never heard them. But then we got out and did some deeper surveying work, and all we found were growlers. No goldens at all. It's all we could hear, then all we found were growlers. And in this deeper pond that feeds into the others, we've got a heap of tadpoles, and we've got some young little metamorphlings that, well, for me, I can't identify, but they're one or the other. But with all of the growlers around, it's a fantastic site. And Jeremy Chark is the head chief ranger of Bairnsdale. He also grew up with Jeff Hurd, so like, they're best mates, and he's been frogging all his life. So he's been an outstanding ally when a lot of the sites are also on Parks land. So this room to move concept is about, well, we found a couple of frogs, and we know where they are sitting on that landscape. Now, it's one thing that really strikes me about that mapping system, and it's a thing that I learned thinking about vegetation. So all of Clydebank Morass, I've revegetated around nearly all of Clydebank Morass. It was one of my first sites 16, 17 years ago. We've been watching how woodlands come back. We had a lot of parks land that was old farmland, so I've been very interested in that site. We've seen it, it completely dries out. It's very, very saline. We've got a lot of salt marsh through there. But the thing that really does interest me is that idea that I'm grappling with is that vegetation is the expression of the harshest condition. So in the harshest time, it's the salt marsh that can survive. And a year like now is an absolute classic case. We have got so much fresh water moving down through that system. That wetland is operating entirely, in my mind, like a freshwater system, the whole thing. Right through the lakes, actually. Lake Wellington, that was sitting up around 40,000 EC there for a while there before the rains came, is sitting on about 4,000. It got down to about 400 at one stage. So it's lovely, big freshwater flush right through the system. And all the macroinvertebrates are there, the birds are there, and the frogs have done exactly like what we hoped. So one of the sites, one of Anna's best sites, was up here. We called Frog Hollow. Just here, we've got 5 growlers, I think it was 5, Anna, that you captured in there. We've been seeing quite a few in there. They dispersed this year. I've heard them all calling all the way down there. So I've no idea how many. They're quite dispersed. And all the way along Australasian Bittern. So, and Bittern again, in this area, 8 of the 11 sites of the survey work through the Gippsland Lakes, 8 of them were in just this one area. And they only had 8. Where we're hearing way more than that in this year, and the frog numbers are just magnificent. So you hear them through here, but they're hard to see. That's the one I stood out in the middle of here somewhere and said, come on, guys. And that first photo, pop, there it was, photo. I really wanted to see it, so that's how difficult it is standing in salt marsh. Come down the system, get down to the bottom here. Now, I've worked with all these landowners. We've fenced off all these systems. Our trees are revegetating around. I know these sites quite well as salt marsh. Down the bottom there this year, on Parks land, within the Ramsar area, right there, we've picked up over 100 young growling grass frogs this year. So we've revegetated all around that. We've done absolutely no hydrological work, but we've been watching it, and that was that thing about this project, mapping in where are they and where have they moved. The whole thing's dispersed, found this lovely little spot. Bitterns are calling, eating them, all the young. They've all been measured. Jeff's made it all official. Unbelievable site. When we're talking about 40 to 60 growlers, we got about 100 new ones on this site. Plus the elders are all in there. We're just a standard. Absolutely stoked. So this idea now, they're bred up. There's some frogs. Good year. Wouldn't you hope for that in a year like this? Absolutely, you'd hope for that. The idea now is, as the conditions change again and the water start to recede and the salinity starts to increase, they move back, then they move back, and then they move back to those little springs. And then again, we have the harsher times, the times like the drought we've just had, and in those little ponds and in those breeding sites where they are, they can knuckle down and they're fine, and even during the bushfire we saw them breeding, but then on a good year, they can expand and they're back out. And these things aren't being written off in management plans as saline wastelands. They're absolutely functioning from this huge, fast-flowing river. Now that we're also changing the nearby habitat, and also with the work we've done with Jeff. So here's the 4 breeding sites we found this year. Here's the next sites. So these are the next frog bogs that we're about to put in. Expand that range again based on Jeff's recommendations. So what we want to see is as the water moves back, we see these new sites get occupied. So then the dispersers move out, some will stay there. They've got to find new sites to move back to, otherwise they will perish in that salt for the young. The young won't survive. Though we have had tadpoles in 18,000 EC change. So the books tell us about 8. We've got an 18,000. And once again, I'm so glad Jeff's there. No one would believe me. They certainly believe him. So while that's been going on, I found some funding for another source on the other side of the lakes. We're in McLeod Morass, which is one of those, one of the freshwater sites of the Gippsland Lakes. We knew there was a few frogs in there, then Anna was down there monitoring, and she located where they were a couple of years in a row. The Ross Trust come along, Landcare couldn't spend all their money. They said, do you want to do anything? I said, absolutely. And we said, let's have a go at trying to look after these frogs down here, and let's use Jeff's thinking and this room to move idea to move right up the gully, because I was already doing some work up in that gully system, and see if we can have a go at creating some habitat in this area and see if we can see what was a known 10 to 15 frogs in the whole McLeod Morass system. 10 to 15 golden bell frogs, that's it. Surely we can do something. So the first thing we did, identifying the threat, is carp. So we thought, well, let's have a crack at some exclusion plots and see how we go. So it was quite, it was dry at the time. Water came in. There was some aquatic veg coming up. It had been dry for a couple of years. So this is pretty good. Let's quickly get these built, get out. We got out there and put 4 of those plots in, 10 by 10 plots. They're parks. We've got the Gunai-Kurnai Rangers out working with me. They're mostly my team, or the Glowak crew. Once again, we're walking in and a couple of the crew, we've got the kayaks, that came in there going, what are these frogs, Mark? What's going on with these frogs? So good about the frog. And I said, you've never seen a frog there. We get it, and I start going, and then we see a branch move, and there's one sitting right out on the end of the limb, and they're like, mate, I'm mate. They go, they're really common. And I'm like, yeah, that's like 1 of 10. There it is. So it was beautiful. That got on the front page of our local paper. But the thing so I was thinking we could put these plots in, and like the idea of meta community, we could move them out with islands and get them to the fringing wetlands and move them along. What I didn't really grasp was the actual hostile nature of what would happen between those plots. And what we saw as good aquatic veg very, very quickly was all ripped up. The carp started banging at your legs. They grew very, very quickly. And it was like sending my little kid across a highway. It was like, there's no way a frog's going to get from there to there. So we put them all quite a lot closer. And we've had some terrific results. All of the water ribbons and potamogetons that I grew, we couldn't plant them because it's too deep. But the response of the vegetation, because we got the pots in quick enough, was quite good. I've seen no frogs in that area this year. Not in that one spot. The water's gone a lot higher and it's stayed high. The carp have been intense. We didn't touch the area where they were because we didn't want to interfere in that. But the dispersal system of the frogs, they've moved way up to the northern area and they're up there. They're highly dispersed, only 2 or 3 within each little clump, but they're not down where we are. But we've been monitoring it very regularly and we picked up these dwarf calaxids in there. So the parks are very keen. There's a program written at the moment with Middle Creek Hatchery, and they've found dwarf calaxids in that same creek line where we're working. And because they've heard through the CMA that I'm digging these ponds, they're like, well, can we do the same in the same location? And then we get them just appearing. The parks have just done an eDNA to look for these guys. And then I'm out with Jeremy, he's like, check that out. And he pulls one out, and it's like, we got them in here. Well, we can say, we should have done the project. We've released them already. Look, going up the go. So we were very excited over that, and I'm very excited I'm very excited that we've been talking about multi-species approaches, and again, it's like the thing with the frog. The frog is the indicator for me of that whole system's freshwater dominance. If they're there, then all these other species will be as well. So while the frog tells the story, we know that the habitat is like with the bittern, that they come with it. So I'm going to just whip through a couple. So I've learnt about this new design I didn't know about, now we're on to, so I've had a crack. We've been doing quite a few. Here's a couple of examples. At Springs, this is one up that, so where we were with that plot before, this is just up the creek line a bit. So this is all fenced off the whole creek. You see the line, so Breeding Australia, we do a lot of direct seeding, so there's a lot of plants coming up through this, but it's just still quite young. And there's one of the bigger sites. And there it is to there. We've got the Glowac guys doing the Turt Willen story, so reintroducing the important plants for digging. Place of women's digging sticks with the tubers, so the guys are out planting those for us. And they're also the frog-friendly plants. Here's another one, which we did way too deep. And you can't even see the rocks. So they're all, we need that to recede a bit for the rocks to be. But there's a nice mound, so it'll be good for the turtles. But there's the collective system. It's about to go into the morass. So we're working back up the creek line. Management, the growlers we find and the goldens love the slashed grass. So that thing about the rank grass getting up really high quite quickly and allowing that stuff with Kay about grazing guidelines, allowing grazing every now and again, or you know where the parkies have slashed tracks for us, that's where we find them, and it's just fantastic. We need to be able to manage this grass. We've got these water holes that are receding and there's nothing coming in like all the roos and the kangaroos and the people that would have come in and opened up areas where the frogs would love. That's just becoming rank pasture grasses, so we really need to manage those. And of course the aquatic vegetation, the dominance of those, so these deep water holes have been really important. On my way here, I drove to one of these sites that the gentleman was talking about where these frog bogs are. This is the first one I've heard of that's been done under that DELP system, so once I heard of that, I'm there. Thankfully, Kerry came and showed me around and took me through the whole process. So yesterday afternoon I walked this site and got to learn on how that's done, and now we've linked up and I've seen a bigger site. We're about to be funded to do those new ones, and I've got a newer example about how to go about this other than me and the excavator. And there's one of our little Meta newborn this year.
Thanks very much, Smarty. That's brilliant. We've got time for one question specifically for Marty. While we set up, Karen, if we set up for to get our online guys back, and then we can, after that, we'll ask the other speakers to come up. But do we have a question for Martin? Richard. Sorry, just wait for the mic. Someone's bringing it for you.
I really like your emphasis on the landscape and the need to move around. That's great. The question is, have you looked at all at the role of wastewater plants in Gippsland, such as Dutton Downs? Because it provides it can provide excellent habitat for growling grass frogs in particular in some places.
Sure. Yeah, McLeod Morass is certainly one of those sites, right. The wastewater system. Where the Dutson's doing their own survey work. They're out there looking for golden bell frogs. There is a persisting population out there. Okay. They're just doing that themselves, so you don't need to duplicate that.
Yep.
The wastewater systems come under that. The last speaker, Ricky, we've got his guy coming out for the turtle breeding, and we've been building turtle mounds in the wastewater. There's a lot of turtles in there. Yeah. It's often I find they don't live that well together. Yeah. But no, there's certainly a water resource.
Yeah, which is sometimes neglected. That's why.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Thanks for that. So if we could get the other speakers for this morning's session come up the front, and we'll sort of do a collective Q&A about the sorts of things that might be crossover questions or themes or information which hopefully we can record and that'll add things. So Peter, Lawrence, who else? Lisa. We've got. Muddy, of course, that's why. And we got Nick and Ricky online, I'm hoping.
Yep, we have.
So now we will need someone, Luke, to run around with the mic to people asking the questions. So our folk online will be able to hear you as well if we speak into the mic. Sure. Wherever's the best place for our recorders, really, I suppose. Is it? Do you want them to stand here or? Just stand here. I think is the easiest, actually. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. We'll just stand around. We're only going to be 10, 15 minutes because we're actually running late into lunch. We don't want to bite into lunch. And by the way, you know, Marty, you've got to be up here too. You haven't finished yet. But, you know, when I get offered a chance to hear Marty talk, and then I know it's about growlers, and then I know that Jeff's, of course, working with him, you know, it's absolute certain. So thank you. Come up here. You can't be shy. So,
Did it go off again?
great. So I just wondered, has someone got some questions about what sorts of themes we might be emerging out of the talks that we've had today? Yes, down the back. Yeah, okay, and then...
Well, one of the themes that struck me is the fencing. I was very impressed with the fencing, even within the water, to keep the carp out. If we're not going to increase get the carp herpesvirus, then maybe we've got to start looking at something else and fencing for the area for the foxes, for the turtles. Yeah, it looks like it's going to be lots of metal around the place.
So Mark's got a question.
Yeah, thanks. Mark Backman from Nature Glenelg Trust again. That was really fantastic session. I'm interested in this idea of just people's thoughts about how hard we make it for ourselves with the approval processes for doing this stuff. Particularly when I think about the last talk, and Martin really expressed it well, that nature doesn't see waste when an opportunity comes along to seed the landscape with founding animals. You know, if you have a boom situation, and we heard it with the hardyhead, you know, explosion in numbers. And if you think about that, what we're seeing when we restore an area and put a species in and that happens, is it's preparing for the event where it can seed the landscape. And most of them aren't going to find somewhere that they can take hold. I find that really interesting, that the way nature's trying to do that and the way that we make it so hard for ourselves to move things around the landscape are at opposite extremes. So I'm interested in people's thoughts on that.
So the panel, what do you think? Who wants to go? Peter? Peter, sorry.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. With the fact that the approvals process can be quite demanding, time-consuming, take up a lot of cost, a lot of money. And I sometimes wonder whether we're better off, you know, if we could streamline that and make it cost-effective, doing more, accepting potentially more failure, but having those places in the landscape that can actually boom when the conditions are right. You know, a lot of, just looking even at the growling grass frog example here, that's, you know, 4 years and a lot of effort goes into that. Yeah, so I completely... Well, yeah, try it and see if it happens. I mean, we like with the fish side of things, we're in a bit of a fortunate position where we've got enough backups that we can afford to try, and if we fail, so what? Some habitats being created, some other animals will move in, we learn from it, we move on. So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
The running joke with Jeff Hurd is, gee, I wish we could just shove a couple of growlers in our pockets and just sort of chuck them out there. Yeah, it's been a real learn. No, we haven't, but it's been a real learning curve having to tick off. And then, in terms of the timing of all of this too, the expectation to have a premises permit licence before you get your ethics assessed at all, and that all needs to be in place before the translocation panel's, you know, going to tick off on that sort of side of things. And yeah, it's become, at least the project here has become a 4, 5, 6 year undertaking to get to a point where we're nearly ready for it. So yeah, it's.
How big was the documentation?
Was it 28 pages of translocation proposal plus all the appendices that they were after? And add the hours we went. Add the hours to sit together and collaborate on. Yeah, it's significant. You wonder what you're missing out on in that 4 or 5 years. You could have had them already on site. Yeah.
So Nick's got his hand up. Great.
Yeah, I was planning. I made my talk quite positive, but that's why I didn't mention permits or ethics or anything. But we work across New South Wales, South Australia, and Victoria, and I think we have over 20 permits and approvals we need to just do general work, but also to do the translocations. And it definitely is an impediment to doing what needs to be done and taking, as Mark mentioned, and taking advantage of opportunities that present themselves with huge numbers of fish or whatever it is. So I guess that comes back to some of the planning and getting all of the stakeholders, so those in charge of permits and approvals, in part of the process along along the way. And that happens in various states and it happens in various areas. And it is often just reinventing the wheel every time a new project comes up. But I think, yeah, that's where, particularly from my perspective, getting fisheries in South Australia and in New South Wales, Victoria, on the same page with what we want to achieve, and acknowledging, I think also there needs to be a bit, the people doing these translocations, doing these works, are the experts on the species, and it might be some bureaucrat in fisheries or whatever, sorry if anyone's here in that area, but that don't know the species and they're just managing risk, but they're not treating the experts with sort of the respect and like the experts have the species' best intentions at heart at the end of the day. So I think that, yeah, there definitely needs to be some improvement moving forward for a bunch of species.
I mean, one of the things in the mammal space is the influence of recovery teams. I don't know if that's something in the fish and frog space too, but you've got to satisfy them, and often the government department won't give you approval without their endorsement. And you know, there's an important check and balance, but some of that risk management stuff can override just some of the, you know, let's give it a go and look where we're at and what are some of the alternatives. One of the interesting things you mentioned before was like when the populations grow and allowing space for them to expand, and that was a really awesome talk about the frogs. With the mammals, some of them disperse outside fences, and that's okay. But we're developing the same kind of population plans that have been talked about for trying to mimic that natural dispersal, but also thinking about overshoot. Often you have this big boom in mammals, and they grow and grow, but there's a point where they outgrow the resources. So with the brush-tailed bettong at Mount Gibson, we're trying to take animals out quite quickly to put them into new projects. But that becomes an important management question then. You know, what do you do with a overabundant, critically threatened mammal? Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I think Ricky, you had a response too, did you?
Yeah, look, with turtles, they come under national parks in each state, but we also need fisheries permits. So you can imagine the number of permits that we go through because they cross both boundaries. But we did have a large extinction event that occurred because of a virus, or almost extinction event up in the Bellinger River, which would never been seen before, but it certainly has led to a lot more conservatism around translocations and movement, and which I think is potentially, it's important to actually recognise that, and the risk, and we see with Chytrid obviously of moving it around, potentially moving it around by people as well. So. But there is a balance that certainly is required. You talk about 4 or 5, but we're going down processes of 6, 7 years now, trying to, just with common species, not the endangered species too.
Great, thank you. I think Suzette was next. No? Okay, all right. Michelle?
Okay, all of this reminds me, it is on, all of this reminds me of the efforts to re-establish River Red Gum in Winton, and the main hindrance to that was a lack of source propagules. And so can you comment on the importance of maintaining the source of some of these populations?
Ricky, Nick? Maintaining the source populations, Nick?
Yeah, so I guess that's evolving, that sort of understanding. And traditionally it was, say, for Murray Hardyhead, it might have 5 or 6 isolated populations, and the management was maintaining them in isolation and not wanting to jeopardise the genetic integrity or structure of each one, but it's definitely moving probably to a meta population level where we're less worried about individual populations. We're trying to mix them. And I guess that is getting back to that mimicking natural dispersal and recolonisation of areas. On the example I gave about Yarra pygmy perch, we're sort of taking that to the next level where we've got genetically distinct lineages. One, the Murray-Darling one, as I mentioned, was extinct, and there's some in the southeast that we're looking to do genetic rescues and crossing across those bounds. So it is a complex thing, and there's obviously issues with introducing things into areas where they're not adapted and not suited. But I do think as part of that future of translocations that I sort of mentioned, we need to start looking at better ways of doing that. And it may be that a species in a population in a certain area is better suited to a new area outside of the range where climate change may be better suited for that species. So it's definitely a consideration, but it's only one consideration. We need to sort of look at other aspects of it as well when we're planning a translocation or planning a release.
Okay. Any other responses? If not, we'll go to Wes for another question. Thanks.
I suppose it starts with a comment. Thanks everyone this morning for a fantastic set of presentations, and I think one thing that really stood out amongst all of you was the importance of collaborations and the fact that you can't take people out of our environmental natural resource management. And any general comments you would have about that relative importance that you've seen. I myself are really keen to see, for example, community and private landholders involved also in this conservation work. So any comment you might have on that would be fabulous. Thank you.
Who wants to have a go? Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess one comment would be just, I think there is really that willingness out there with private landholders and that thirst, you know, to get involved in this kind of thing, like to be part of rewilding a species or bringing a species back to an area is really an exciting prospect for a lot of landholders. And I think there's huge scope for private landholders to be involved in urban areas, you know, for friends of groups and residents to be involved and be engaging with their environment. So I completely agree. I'll be honest, like back in the day, I come from, I guess, a science background moving into community stuff. Initially, I was putting in community groups, to be honest, because it was part of, you know, what gets funded. And it's really been a steep learning curve for me, and realising that, you know, these community groups are absolutely essential for the longevity of projects, for the buy-in, for the different range of partners and views that you bring in. And yeah, you know, like for me now, first and foremost, community, and build projects from there. So yeah, a massive convert, I suppose.
Great. Just go to Suzette next. But I had a question too about that in terms of private landholders. If we're encouraging them to be having an endangered species on their property, what are the sort of legal implications for their management of their site?
Yeah, that's a good question. In terms of what we do is we set up management agreements with them. Obviously, they know that they'll be getting a threatened species on their site. If the site dries up, that's just natural. That's just what happens. We ask them to let us know if a site's drying up so that we can go and salvage fish. And then I guess, you know, a lot of the implications would be around if landholders wanted to develop that site. So as long as they're aware and on board, it hasn't been an issue so far, or a deterrent really.
Great. Okay. Suzette, last question, I think.
Thanks. I'm Suzette. I'm a conservation ranger at Hobsons Bay City Council, which is a Western Melbourne council, and we have critically endangered plains grassland existing there. So that's one of the most important ecosystems that we kind of want to look after. But it looks like we might be able to get some sort of resourcing or partnership to look at rewilding in some sense, and I was kind of joking before, but I was talking to Peter about reintroducing native fish into a ex-quarry, which is now called Newport Lakes, and it's a big lake system. And I joked about the frog that we have, and I was talking to you about mammals. As a specific question, if you were to kind of look at all those three things, what do you think we should prioritise, given that if, say, we were to reintroduce mammals, it would be really expensive and costly, and it wouldn't probably be for a great ecological function, it would more be for promotion of the species. Whereas the growling grass frog we know was there. The fish, they obviously weren't there. It used to be a quarry, and now we've got carp there. Yeah, where do you think council might be, and I know you don't know my resource constraints, but where do you think we might be best off sort of pouring our resources into?
Okay, well, we might go to Nick next.
I'll just make a few general points. So I guess the best thing is to preserve what's there. So if you've got a good understanding of what's there, then that can really guide where you go. But if you don't have a good understanding of what species still occur in an area, then I would be putting your resources to that to get an understanding of what remnant populations of a threatened species or generalist species is occurring there is probably the best way forward. That we have all talked about conservation trade applications, but they are, in a way, the last resort. And so if there is habitat there, but in terms of priorities, I would say fish. Just go with fish; they're the best. No. Yeah, I guess it touches on a lot of the discussions that it might be driven by community, what community want in the area, what values they hold, cultural values as well for that area if they've got a particular focus on a species. But yeah, I guess you do need to come to a prioritisation where you're, in a way, trading off species. But I'd get a good understanding of what's there, what used to be there, and what the community feel is important in your council area would be how I'd tackle it.
Thanks very much, Nick. I think really we've actually run out of time. We're running over. So lunch is about to be served. So I think we'll thank everybody, and we'll convene after lunch at... I don't have mine. Thank you, everyone.